but we've heard from a variety of senior women with great experience of the sport industry. But to conclude today, we wanted to turn the stage to a group of young women, lovely young women here, and it's going to be able to give them a chance to give their insights and experiences in the sector and opportunities and challenges about what the future could hold for them and, of course, for all of us working in this industry. So please welcome, from Sport England, the Strategic Lead for Communications and External Affairs, Ochuko Adekoya. And then we have the youngest female board member of sport in the UK. I think that's the title we're going with you. It's Georgina Roberts from the Clay Target Shooting Federation. And in the middle here, from a Formula One Commercial Business Intelligence Manager, Giulia Zecchini. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining us. And this panel's called the Now Generation, okay? So there's no pressure for you to feel like you have to do things now, but we are looking at you for the future, okay? This is about how you're thinking in terms of strategically, systemically, and everything else that you can make some changes. And I'll start with you, Ochuko. Now, being where you are at Sport England, it's a tough role in terms of making sure the communications and everything are pitched at the right level and pitched in a place where people understand that women are now very much embedded in sporting life in the UK, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think particularly at Sport England, where we are trying to raise participation in sport across the whole country, it's really important that we're able to think about the whole country and all of the needs and different groups of people that we're trying to reach. And so ensuring that the messages that we're putting out there are tailored to meet diverse perspectives, age groups, demographics is really important. And that's why women being front and centre is so critical.
You know, I think about sometimes, I can imagine going into your office, you've got this big thing, this big spreadsheet, and you've got all the demographics and the ages, and you're thinking, right, this person, that person, you're joining all the dots. How challenging is that to make sure that the message that you're putting across is for everyone and speaks volumes and is impactful?
I mean, my background isn't from sport, and I think so I'm sort of 2 years into working in the sports sector, and I think having a range of perspectives within the organisation, so you have everything from the people who are very sporty, who are out there doing it, to people like myself who dip in and out, and actually being able to understand that people have different relationships with being active. For some people, they'll do it all the time, come what may, and for others, they'll dip in and out. So I think understanding that there's a range of perspectives in the mix that ensure that our messages can cut through and meet the needs of all of the people that we're trying to meet. And it's a big challenge. We've got big targets. We're trying to change behaviour across the whole nation. And that's why our campaigning is becoming so important.
Yes.
And trying to make sure that we're using all the methods we can to tell the story in a different way and in an unexpected way. This Girl Can being one of them.
And some great campaigns. I was about to mention This Girl Can, and so many people resonate with the campaign. My husband waits for the This Girl Can advert every year to see what track you've used, for example. So it's about now seeing that this is something that actually is in the psyche of people. And you say your own background isn't sport.
Not sport.
Which is great, because I guess now women from all angles are coming into the industry and trying to make a change, right?
Exactly. So I've come from the voluntary sector. So I've had years working on campaigns, trying to push issues in business, in entrepreneurship, in education. And actually what attracted me to sport wasn't the sport. It was what sport does. And it was the fact that ultimately it's about making people's lives better. It's about improving health. It's about giving people in circumstances that might be difficult something that they can hang on to that's kind of pure and good. So for me, it's about the life-changing element of sport and how communications can take those messages out through various means.
Okay. Giulia, I'm going to come on to you now. You work for Formula One. Whenever I think of Formula One, I think of the glam. The travel, like a lot of travel up and down all over the world, fast cars, the parties. And you're probably just going to tell me that's none of it's true, aren't you?
Well, there's some of that, but a lot more to it as well.
And just explain what your role is within the F1.
So I sit within our commercial department, and I focus on business intelligence, which sounds like a very fancy term, but to come down to it, it's data analytics and research to really understand what Formula One has to offer and who we should partner with to really grow the sport internationally.
And how did you get into that? Because it sounds like a job that you would see and not quite know what qualifications you would need or what background essentially you would need to get into a role like that.
Yeah, I think it's a role that's definitely been growing in sporting organizations in the last couple of years. I come from a data analytics background, so coming from Nielsen and then Nielsen Sports as well, focusing a lot on media valuations and understanding the sponsorship landscape. The shift into Formula One and business intelligence was more of a strategic angle. And I don't think there's any specific way to get into it. I think plenty of different backgrounds could fit into that role, whether you come from a strategy background, again, a data research background, but it's kind of that high level look into portfolios, whether it's sport, entertainment, FMCG, and applying that to the entire landscape.
Okay, Georgina, I'm going to move on to you next. You sit on a board, a sports board, and let's be honest, when we think of sports boards, what do we think of? You know, we don't think of young women on sports boards, and you're one of the youngest in the country. What was your motivation for getting involved in governance quite early on in your own career?
So I've actually been competing in shotgun event, which is Olympic trap, for about 5 years, and over those years I've kind of found that, you know, there's a lot of stigma that surrounds shooting. So it's a sport for men, you know, maybe an elite sport. It's very niche, and it's not going to change unless we do something about it. And I think that actually every athlete needs to step up and do something to change that, because in comparison to the amount of men that compete, maybe there's less than half women.
Yeah.
You know, on the international stage, and that's a shame, because although it is a niche sport, it's an incredible sport. It's an Olympic sport. We've just been reintroduced into the Commonwealth in some capacity, which is incredible. But unless the athletes and the grassroots level step up and decide to make a change, you know, the sport as a whole won't change. The governance, the rules won't change. The way that things happen and the speed that things happen. You know, there's on the Welsh Association. So I'm on the WCTSA. They've, you know, the men that are on there are maybe 50 plus in their age range. They've been competing in shooting for maybe 30 to 40 years, so their experience is incredible, and I can really appreciate what they've done for the sport so far. But actually there are some elements of, you know, shotgun shooting that stay in the dark ages, and actually we need to be reaching out. We need to be, you know, like you said, increasing the demographic of people, and in trying to include as many people as we can, rather than just focusing on those who are competing now. We need to be looking for the next generation of athletes. We need to be looking to increase the amount of women who are competing, because at the minute the amount of people on the team is 9 men and 2 women. You get 2 vets, 2 juniors, 2 super vets. But why is there only 2 women that get to compete? And actually, why aren't the women competing as the senior men? Why can't we have both? And it's only people who are going to step up and decide to do something about that.
Okay, and that's a really good point. And I'll take this out to all of you. How important is it that that comes down from the board? How important is it that we see that representation across the board for yourselves who are in lower positions but are aspiring to get up there?
I think leadership is so important.
Yeah.
Really, really important to ensure that organisations are not just recruiting in their own image, you know. And certainly I know from where I work currently, there's been a lot of work to encourage the sports that we fund to think about their diversity of their boards, and I think that will only start to accelerate the pace of change if we're starting to see more representation at the senior level, because ultimately you can't be what you can't see. So yeah, it's absolutely important, really important.
And when you think about the F1 board and, you know, senior management, executive level, do you have the aspiration to push up and think that you could actually sit up there, you know, C-suite one day and say, right, I am fully involved in the big decision making when it comes down to F1?
I think at F1 we're incredibly lucky, actually. I can't speak for the Bernie Ecclestone era, although from what I've heard it was very meritocratic, but since the Liberty Media takeover, I think our office is extremely diverse. And it's the first time in my career that I have really senior women setting the example for all of us in more junior positions. The examples, Chloe Target-Adams, she's our head of promoters, Ellie Norman, head of marketing, sorry. So for the first time in my career, I actually have women internally that I can look up to. And I think it's exceptionally important. And speaking to other women internally, I think it's really making a difference, because now we can see where we can be and what we can achieve.
Georgina, do you feel encouraged when you walk into these board meetings and you come across these the middle-aged men that are there making the decisions? Do you feel encouraged enough and supported enough to sit up and say what you want to say?
Absolutely. So when I was growing up, I was really, really lucky to have a really supportive mother. She's a head teacher. She's very strict with work, and she's got a really good balance with how she transpires that over to raising. I'm an only child, so just me, but she's really made an impact on how I conduct myself, and to always believe in myself, no matter, if I'm the only girl in there, I'm the youngest person in the room, just to sit up and you should know your own value. And that was probably the most important thing she could have taught me. And actually, that's probably the reason why I kind of made the step up and decided to actually sit on the board and to make those changes that are necessary.
Okay, I'm going to flip it a bit, okay, because we spoke in the previous panels about men being allies. You are the now generation, so there would have been women that have gone before you. And Ochuko, do you feel sometimes that you get the support from women who have gone before you, who maybe have a bit of a blueprint, that reach down and help you up? Or do you sometimes feel it's still a place you may have to navigate yourself, the small little nuances that go on in our industry?
I think there's a fair amount of navigating yourself. I've always been really lucky in that I've worked with brilliant women all the way through my career, outside of sport and now in sport. And I've never felt uncomfortable in reaching out and asking for a tip, asking for help. And I've got mentors both informally and formally, many of whom have become peers and friends over time. But I do think that we could do more to encourage that kind of sponsorship and mentoring, so that all of us coming up feel like there's somebody that we can aspire to. I mean, I'm often in rooms where I'm the only person that looks like me, and that isn't good enough, really. So there's definitely more that can be done, but I've really benefited from having brilliant women around me in communications all the way through who I can call on.
When you don't see that representation in those rooms, does that put you on the back foot?
I think I've become used to it, which isn't ideal, but is the reality. I have become used to it. And I've learned to give myself the pep talks and tell myself that I'm in that room for a reason, and I bring something uniquely of value to that conversation. It does take time to kind of build that confidence, and it depends on your personality type. But I would like to see more. I would like to see more people that look like me working in this sector.
Do you feel like you sometimes maybe have to code switch a bit and try and make sure that you're adapting to that environment and that space?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of negotiating and sort of thinking about how you present yourself in certain spaces. I think we all do it. I think we all kind of flex up and down according to the conversation. I think it's something that we all kind of learn to do as women, navigating our way through kind of professional life. It would be nice not to have to do it as much.
Yeah, and I guess we spoke just on the previous panel about that mental load, and you spoke about some fantastic women that are in F1 in big positions. Do you feel comfortable enough, Giulia, to be able to go to them for advice or sit down with them and work out your own personal strategy navigating the sports world?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel comfortable. I think sometimes there's a lack of time when people are in senior leadership positions. They're very busy. They have their own teams to take care of, so it's very difficult to find that time. So I don't always seek mentors internally in an organization. Sometimes it's very useful to have external mentors, even in different industries, that could help. But there's definitely a level of comfort. Again, I agree. I think more could be done to cater to those conversations and the safe spaces to discuss any issues that you might be having, not solely with your line manager.
And Georgina, how do you combat people who say to you, oh, just focus on the shooting, don't worry about the administrative side of things?
I think they couldn't be more wrong because, I have so many different roles within shooting. So athlete, coach, board member, ambassador for 2 amazing charities. And when people say you can't do one and the other, actually it's all the other things that have complemented my own shooting, my own shooting career. And it's actually these things that have given me the confidence within myself and the way I add value to other people that has helped me understand more about myself, changed my mindset, and actually makes me the most comfortable and most confident I can be when I stand on that range and pull the trigger.
And you've put a pretty fresh perspective, haven't you, into that boardroom. And just tell us about any quick wins that you may have had since you've joined.
So there's a few different things, but I think the main point that we've done is actually having taster sessions.
Okay.
So I shoot Olympic trap, it's an Olympic discipline, but there's more to shooting than that. They're in national disciplines that people can come and try, and we shouldn't try and intimidate people or, scare them off too quickly and say, come on, you need to come and be the next Olympic champion. Actually, there is something for everyone, and if you just want to go and shoot on a Saturday, you're more than welcome to come and do that. So introducing that kind of level of grassroots sport as well has probably been the biggest achievement so far.
Ochuko, when you think about the space that you've come from to where you are now, did you feel that kind of masculine energy when you entered an office, or do you feel actually, what's everybody talking about? This is absolutely fine.
So, in communications generally, there, and particularly in voluntary sector communications, it is quite female dominated. And so I've had a large chunk of my career so far being surrounded by women most of the time, which has been fantastic. And I must say there is, not in all organisations and not in all conversations, but there is, I find myself in rooms, particularly on a kind of comms level, with more men than I'm used to working in sport at the moment. Having said that, I'm not put off by the kind of masculine energy. I think, there are some sports that are more male-dominated than others, but there is definitely a difference coming from voluntary sector into the sports sector in terms of that split and that balance, for sure.
I'm getting a really positive vibe actually from the panel, and that's really interesting because you are a generation that sit here now, and you probably haven't had the same type of challenges that someone like a Liz Nicol may have had when she was coming up through the 90s. So, Giulia, when you think back to your career in sport at the moment, is there anything where you've sat down and thought, maybe in reflection, that didn't seem quite right, and then you've nailed it maybe down to gender?
I try and not define too many things by gender, because I think that would bring on a whole host of issues. I think throughout my career there have been moments where I have been the only female in a room, and not at F1, but I've had instances where we're having a meeting, and if I'm the one that gets the coffee, I automatically get put in she's the assistant, she's going to be note-taking and so on. I think as long as you're in a clear mindset, you know what you offer, and you stick to your guns, you'll be fine. I wouldn't focus on the negative aspects. But obviously there's all instances, but I think we're all capable of overcoming them and keep going. I think women before us have had many more obstacles than us, and it's getting progressively better. Okay,
we heard Elizabeth Manoli there, doctor, speak about imposter syndrome. I'm going to put this to you guys now. I think we'll do a bit of a chunk on this because it's something that has been around for years. You said it's a psychological, behavioural type trait that we as women may experience more than what men do. And when have you been in a position where you have felt like a complete imposter, you genuinely feel like you don't belong there, and you just want to leave the room?
It's happened quite a few times. So the WCTSA we have quite a large board because we have discipline reps for each kind of section of shooting, and we only have 2 women sitting on that board. So there's been a few instances where it's been a bit not comments to say, but the older generation of men sometimes have a mindset that's not very PC, and sometimes can be a little bit uncomfortable. So I think
you're being very diplomatic,
so this is one thing it taught me how to deal with those situations and try and be diplomatic about it. And that transpires into being an athlete as well, with certain men, thinking certain things, making certain comments, and you do have to have a thick skin and just completely ignore it. And that's one thing that I've not just tried to bring through in coaching, but also trying to encourage other people to step up onto boards, whether that's a Welsh board or another national board, or actually on the main British shooting NGB. And I think that that's something that we're going to sadly have to deal with for a long time to come. But I think, and hopefully it continues, but it is starting to phase out, and it's not something that's happening, you know, as often as it used to.
And Giulia, you talk about sometimes feeling imposter syndrome, and if you were to pick, you've got 7 days in the week, if you were to pick a number, how many days of those week would you say that you sometimes feel that imposter syndrome?
I'd say maybe 4 out of the week. I think as humans, it's really easy to forget about your capabilities and everything you've achieved. It's very easy to focus on all your downfalls, all your failures. So it just takes a second to like step back, reflect. I'm actually really capable. I can do this stuff. There's a reason why I'm here. There's a reason why I'm asked to be here. I mean, today, prime example, imposter syndrome, being on this stage with you amazing women. So I think it just takes a little bit of reflection to know that you do belong. And
you genuinely feel like what Elizabeth said, just sometimes understanding that it is happening is the best way to cope with it, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. Just digest the fact that it's okay. It's a psychological barrier that we all have. And it just takes a little bit of time and reflection to overtake it.
And what about yourself, Ochuko? Do you feel that you feel that imposter syndrome? Are you that person that maybe steps outside her comfort zone often enough to create new zones?
I mean, I know certainly for me, one of the challenges I've had, although not so much anymore, is that I used to look a lot younger than I am. And so there's a kind of an age thing sometimes as well in terms of being younger than other people in the room. I do think there's something about kind of drawing on your own confidence and recognising that you've achieved things, you've done things, you are there for a reason. And I think once you're able to sort of draw on that, you realise that it is in your mind most of the time. It isn't an actual genuine thing that's happening. I think also in terms of imposter syndrome, part of it is about recognising what you can't do, that actually you don't know everything, and that's fine, that you don't have to bluster through and pretend to know everything.
Yeah.
And actually when you're building teams as well, like build people into your team who have skills that you don't.
Yeah. And I feel like you're going to tell us you're 62 years old now. After you said you look a lot younger than what you are, and that's a big point, isn't it? There is a thing about age. You know, as a woman, sometimes you may walk into a space. If you look a certain age, do you feel you get the respect that you deserve? Now, Georgina, no disrespect to our lovely panelists, you clearly are the youngest person on the panel. Do you feel that? Do you feel that your age sometimes puts you a step back with people actually listening to and respecting what you want to say?
Nearly every day.
Wow.
I think one thing where you just actually need to take time, I know you said to appreciate yourself and appreciate what you've done and reflect on what you've achieved. And I think after I took a year out from competing last year and focused on myself, which has actually really helped me appreciate the value that I can add. And so now whereas previously I've kind of gone, I'm so young, I'm really probably not supposed to be here or not wanting to be here and make these changes. Actually now I'm like, no, because I know why I'm here. I know what I want to achieve, and I know that I can make these changes and do what's necessary to achieve these goals. So it's just one thing that it's hard to deal with, but you know that you need to, or you know that they need to respect you, and you need to respect yourself for that.
And how do you overcome that, Giulia, knowing that your age sometimes might be a barrier? If you've got a really important point, you want to get it across, and they might look at you and think she hasn't got any experience. How do you get over that?
I feel quite lucky because I don't think age has played a big part in the messages that I'm trying to portray. I think I'm in a role where expertise is quite, not rare, but it is quite a niche topic. Therefore, not that many people that I'm in a room with might know what I know.
Yeah.
So I feel like I gain respect through my expertise and the studies that I've carried out. But at the end of the day, I'm not scared to speak up. If people interrupt me, I will definitely make a point of it. So I think it's just making people know your value and, you know, headstrong and keep going.
Okay. Got a couple of questions here I'm going to put to all of you that have come in from everybody watching. Someone says, could we hear more about what women in sport can do to move women's sport forward further and more into the mainstream? So if you had like a real eureka moment, a real bright idea, I guess, what would that be? How could you inspire a wider movement?
I think there's something around being that role model. So I've recently started mentoring. and mentoring a marketing student in her first year. And actually you realise that a lot of people coming into the world of work just aren't aware of the opportunities that are out there in sport. They aren't aware that you can build a career beyond being a professional sports person. So I think more of us having those conversations with people coming into the sector about the opportunities that are in comms, in data, in all these different fields, will help people to kind of think about it as something that could be for them.
And I think what's interesting about this panel here, that you've all come from different sectors of the industry. It's not just a particular place that women seem to be shoehorned in. It seems to be across the board. And if you, Giulia, had a bright idea that would push women's sport forward, where we get to see more women maybe in F1, what would that be for you?
I think similarly, obviously it's different from on track to in the office, but if I could affect where I am, so in the office, it does start at that grassroots level. So in schools, we were talking about school curriculums earlier, and I think it's quite easy to get pigeonholed at school and all you know is to become an engineer, a doctor, and so on. So to be able to help kids understand, and young girls, that it's not only about being a professional athlete, but you can work in everything that you might like. All the subjects that you might like will play a part in sports later on in life, and that is an option, and then carry that out through university, I think, is really important.
And how would you put those pathways in place? You said that you love the taster days. That's been really good for you. And what would you like to see more of with young girls potentially getting into governance? What kind of advice would you give them to getting into the right pathway?
Just go for it. I think, with shooting being so niche, we need to make it more accessible. Especially with certain demographics, like I said earlier, we need to show that actually this is a sport for everybody. Although it's expensive, I think if there was one thing that I could do to click my fingers and change everything, it would make sure there was more funding to make the sport accessible for everybody. But there are certain things that are in play now. So I know that I'm an ambassador for the Women's Sports Trust, who have recently come up with an Unlocked campaign, which is incredible. So they're working with, I think there's maybe 40 athletes from loads of different sports that are trying to demonstrate, it's the year of the Olympics, there's going to be a peak in women who are performing, and trying to get involved with sports at all different levels. But the campaign is kind of to demonstrate that, there's not just people who run and people who swim. There's the Olympics, there's the Paralympics. You can be able-bodied, you can be, have a disability. There's something for everyone, and offering them kind of support and advice around where you can go with that and what's actually out there, I think has actually been really, really powerful.
Okay, I've got my final questions as before we wrap. I went online and I went into the old Twitter machine and I put in women's sport to see what would come up. And you know what happens when sometimes you get the trolls and you get the people that are really supportive. I went to debunk some myths. I'm going to put a myth to each of you, and we're going to discuss a debate very quickly as to why that's absolute rubbish. So first one goes to you, Ochuko. Women's sport is boring. Nobody cares.
You need to watch it. I think you can say that until you watch it. You watch it and you realise that that's not the case.
So you genuinely believe in the product at the moment that's out there for women's sport and what people want to do?
Absolutely, and it's growing, and there's so much success happening across different fields. So it's just about encouraging people to support it, and those of us who are in it to also support it.
Okay. All right, the next one. A lot's been said about women's equality. Sport is not an important issue for women's equality. We should be focusing on other issues, political participation and pay equity.
I don't get why it always has to be a competition between things. I think sports is a huge part of everyone's life, keeping active, being healthy. Therefore, just quite silly. I work in sports. I participate in sport 5 times a week. I think it's really, really important for everyone's well-being, and I think diversity and inclusion in it is vital, because we need to reflect internally what's on the pitch, and what's on the pitch also has to reflect the general population.
Yeah, okay. And this one will be really easy for you. Young women just aren't interested in getting into sport.
Well, you're wrong. I think there's more we can do to support young women in sport, but there is definitely a huge platform for these women who do want to get involved in sport. I know there's, when you're at school, you kind of hit puberty and you get a bit conscious and you're not really sure what you want to do. But people are still taking part in sport. They want to take part in sport. They want to branch out and try new things. There's loads of different charities like the Mintridge Foundation who are trying to like encourage people and educate them on what's out there, different sports like shooting, plug there, but just come and give them a go. And we're seeing more and more junior women in shooting than ever before, but we still need more. And opening, like I mentioned, those taster sessions, that's how we're going to find these women and try and poach them from other sports and to come and take part and learn about what we're about.
Fantastic. Easily done. I knew it would be easy for you guys to debunk those myths for me. So thank you very much, Georgina, Giulia and Ochuko. Thank you so much.